Millions of children are educated every day in a myriad of settings. Homeschool, public school, private school, charter schools, online academies, learning pods, private tutoring, and more. Why are so many families transitioning to homeschooling? What advantages have they found? What unique challenges do they face? What have they learned, and how can listening to their experiences support your child's education? These are their stories. Together, we learn. This is the Edvantage. Hello, fellow educators, and thank you for listening. I'm Todd Michael, creator and host of The Edvantage. Today's guest is Zara Fagan, PhD. Zara Fagan is a homeschool and business-owning mother of four. She is the author of the book Minimalist Homeschooling and the creator of the Simple is the New Smart podcast and membership. Zara's PhD is in neurobiology from the University of Chicago, where her research focused on addiction, specifically the effects of chronic stress on vulnerability to addiction. Perhaps in response to that intimate knowledge of the effects of stress, Zara keeps things as simple as possible. Now, her love for processes and reproducible results, combined with a no-nonsense approach to keeping things simple and impactful, has made her a favorite mentor among the homeschooling community. In addition to her homeschooling passions, Zara runs wholesale and real estate businesses alongside her husband and children. Zara joined us from her home in Indiana. I hope you enjoy the interview. Zara Fagan, welcome to The Edvantage.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Todd. I appreciate you having me.
I have been really excited since the very first episode of your podcast that I listened to get a chance to talk to you, because I feel like every time I listen to one of your podcasts, I'm there, it's like the classic meme of like me listening to my favorite podcast and you're trying to talk to the poster. Like I'm verbally wanting to agree with you and talk back and be like, yes, that's such a great point. Thank you for highlighting that. So I'm excited for this chance to have a little bit more of a dialogue than just me while I'm working out in my garage, agreeing alongside with your great advice.
Oh, well, thank you. That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Before we get into kind of some of the meat of what you have to offer and your great wisdom, I'd love to hear a little bit about your own educational experience. I know that you had more of a traditional school experience as a kid, and you of course are well educated yourself. I would love to hear a little bit about that and maybe how that informed your own approach to homeschooling, and maybe even some challenges that it might have provided. Because I think a lot of us, forget that we bring a lot of our own perspective when we approach homeschooling, and not always helpful. Sometimes it is. We all have different things that we have to kind of come to terms with when we start homeschooling. So please share a little bit about your background.
Well, thanks. And thanks for asking that question, because I think that, on my own podcast, I kind of focus on the how-tos and the information, and I don't necessarily talk so much about my own experience. So, I'm a public school kid. I'm the product of the public schools. And I actually grew up in Fairfax County, which anyone who's been following sort of the politics around homeschooling knows that it's been kind of exciting over the past year or two. Fairfax County parents have been leading a charge in being more informed about what's being taught in the schools and really getting engaged with the whole process of how much they know about what their kids are learning and what they want their kids learning, right? And so it's been kind of fun, but Fairfax County typically is considered one of the best school systems in the country. It's right outside Washington, D.C. There are a lot of very ambitious parents who expect their kids to be getting very good educations. And so, I was in that framework my whole life, where you do really well wherever you are so that you can get into a good college, so that then you can get into a job, right? So you do well now so that you have more opportunity in the next step and the next step and the next step, right? So it's this ambition without a set deadline, right? It's a moving target, right? You just keep pushing through, keep jumping through the hoops. And so, that was definitely my experience. I went on to college, I went on to grad school. And actually, I finished grad school. It wasn't everything I expected it to be. I felt like in grad school, I had finally arrived, right? It was knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Now I could do research. I could just study the science. I could really dive into it. I could ask the questions. And I was funded by the National Science Foundation, which is different from the NIH in that it is science for the sake of science. You don't necessarily have to be curing, treating, preventing any disease per se. And so I was really excited about it. And looking back, I think that's kind of a commentary on where I am in my homeschooling, where I feel so thankful that we have knowledge for the sake of knowledge, not only when they're in that in the kids and the toddlers and they're curious and they want to know everything, but we don't halt that for their schooling years and tell
Sure.
them to put it off now until grad school when they can start really thinking and diving into things and getting into the meat of things. That now as a homeschooler, I really love that we can sort of do knowledge for the sake of knowledge continually throughout their entire development.
Right.
So I think that really has influenced me in retrospect. That's sort of
Hmm.
that's the part of education that I finally enjoyed. So I get kind of, nerdy and geeked out about being able to do that with my kids all the time, every day when they're interested in something.
Right.
And, so the other thing I will say that I've noticed from my public school experience is that one great thing about Fairfax County is that they had individualized programs. So I was always in an accelerated or gifted and talented program, right? And so
Hmm.
that worked really well for me. But I did learn at a very young age to act stupider than I was, right? So I
Interesting.
distinctly remember in fourth grade, there are correct mistakes when you're teaching, right? So when you
Hmm.
have a toddler, if they say, I readed that book, it's a correct mistake because they're playing with that suffix ed and they know
Right.
it's in the past tense, but they put it on. They just don't know it's an irregular verb. So
Right.
they're using the suffix correctly, but it's incorrect because they aren't fluent in the language, right? And I remember sitting in fourth grade math and thinking, if the teacher calls on me, what correct mistake can I give her? Now, I didn't know those terms, but I
Wow.
said, how can I give the wrong answer? But it seems
Hmm.
like it's not just a random number. So I remember working ahead and thinking to myself, if she calls on me, I'm not going to carry the 10, right? I'm not going to carry the 1. I'm going to give the answer as though I forgot to carry.
Right.
And it was because already at that age I was being made fun of for being a goody goody, right? Or
Right.
being a teacher's pet
Sure.
or being perfect at everything. So I got really good at flying under the radar, sitting in the back of class, making sure my peers didn't know what kind of grades I got, right? So I do well on the
Wow.
tests, but I didn't want anyone to know, right?
Yeah.
And I realized this when my oldest child, if anybody follows me on social media, you'll know my oldest child loves building his own RC airplanes. He's
Yeah.
always loved everything involved with space, everything involved with flight, anything involved with engineering. He's always loved. And I
It's
remember
so
he
great.
was,
I love to see your posts about it. It gets me
yeah,
excited about the things that my kids are into. I'm like, yes, yes, push them that way to actually explore it and take it further and further. And
yeah, and he's for the most part completely self-taught. So I'm here to say you don't have to know things in order for your kids to
yeah,
learn things. Like for sure, he is predominantly self-taught. I just would kind of help him if I could, right? So and
right.
support him, definitely support him. So he was at the park one day with a bunch of kids, and he came home and he told me that they were making fun of him because they were calling him Jimmy Neutron. And my kids
Mhm.
don't know who that character is, but it's an animated character with glasses who's kind of a science geek nerd type of
Right,
character, if I understand correctly. But my boys could tell that it was meant to be an insult.
right.
And one of their friends said, it's this nerd character on TV who's like really smart and really nerdy. So my son literally came home and he said, Mom, I don't understand how that's an insult. He's like, that's pretty much a compliment. But if
Right.
you're saying like I can build things and I'm smart in that way, then I'm okay with that. And to this day, his confidence hasn't been shattered, right? So
Mhm,
nothing was sort of ridiculed out of him. And that was, in homeschooling, you sort of hold on to those moments of affirmation because you spend a
mhm.
lot of time saying, I think this is right. I think this is what we should be doing. This
Sure.
sounds good. I'll try this. And that was one of those moments when I realized that it's not just academically that we're providing a better environment for our kids, but we
Mhm.
really are changing the culture around learning and reaching your potential and being
Yeah.
who you're meant to be. And when he was able to come home and say, Mom, that's a compliment, I'm not offended at all. I felt like, yes, this is another reason we are homeschooling, because that's when I remembered how much time and effort I spent trying to appear not smart to my peers so that I could
Hmm.
fly under the radar, you know?
Hmm.
So anyways, to make a long story short, yes, I'm from the public schools, and yes, it has influenced, I think, how I see homeschooling for sure.
Yeah. I love both of those stories because it highlights that social awareness. You're absolutely right that and especially, you see this in kids that can do well in school, like you were able to, but you
Mhm.
also see this in kids that struggle in school, and they'll find ways, to use their social understanding to, maybe get out of assignments or to, distract from what they feel are their weaknesses or what they've been told or shown are their weaknesses. And so,
Right,
it's like, hey, I don't get that grade of scores on the tests, but I'm really funny. So I'm just
right,
going to put all of my energy into keep saying funny things or finding ways to make other kids laugh. And pretty soon, that's kind of their whole identity, right? Because
right,
that was
absolutely.
more within their grasp with the tools they were offered than it was to find a way to learn the content or whatever it is. Um,
Right,
but
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
was just going to say with homeschool, it's so interesting how so much of that competition is taken out, and it really is about your only competition is with yourself previously, right? Am I
hmm,
learning more than I knew yesterday? Am I a
right,
more capable learner each and every day? And it's not necessarily even every day, but over time, maybe I have to look back a week or a month just to see some of that progress. But the competition is not there. And I actually, it's funny you mentioned your oldest son. I was watching one of your YouTube videos, and it was a fantastic lesson. It was a science lesson, and you had all your kids gathered around the table, and the lesson itself was great. But there was this little moment that really stood out to me, where your youngest daughter was asking for a little pink pom pom, and you were in the middle of teaching, and so you were kind of already mid sentence when she asked for it. And I saw your son turn and look at her. He saw that she was asking, and his next sentence to you was, "You want me to get her one?" And you said, "Yeah, please." And he jumped up, got her one, and gave it to her. And it's those little moments for me, the learning and the content that you were teaching them was fantastic. But it's those little moments for me that just 100% sell the value of homeschooling because, how often do you see a 12, 13-year-old kid who has, number one, the awareness to care that a sibling has that need, but then to volunteer to go and help. And I see that in my kids, my two oldest all the time where they're jumping in, they're helping. Nobody in the group thinks if my sibling has something it's taking away from me, or if my peers have something it's taking away from me. It's more of a mindset of like
right,
the stronger we all get, the stronger we all are, right?
right, right. And we're all cheering for each other for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I love that because the oldest ones have gotten really good too at seeing when the little one is like, look, I wrote my name. And they're like, wow, yay. And they're really encouraging to her. And it would be very easy to be like, I wrote my name 5 years ago. Like,
Sure.
you know, but
Sure.
they are, yeah, they are super encouraging. And I think you said one thing that I want to bring up is the whole idea of image.
Hmm.
I do think that in school, your image is very much formed by those around you, how you want to appear to them, how they view you, and sort of what they call you, right? How they
Right.
identify you, who they tell you you are, right?
Right.
And I think that in homeschooling, we very much get to change our kids' image of themselves, and they have their own self awareness where they get to come up with their own image.
Hmm.
And, I do tell my kids it's very simple. Wake up every day and be who you want to be, right? That's your choice. Those are the choices you make. Who do you want to be? And a lot of times when they're not making good decisions, I say, who do you want to be, right? Like, what kind of brother do you want to be right now? What kind of
Hmm.
sister do you want to be right now? And I think that's very different because I think in school, you don't necessarily feel like you have that much control over which image you get to choose, right?
Sure.
There's an image that will fly
Right.
and that will sort of keep you safe, and then
Right.
there's an image that's riskier, right? So yeah, definitely, I think that that's a good point to make, that in homeschooling our kids get to mature in a way where they have their own self-awareness.
So I think it's interesting with so many homeschool families because, and I understand where it comes from, but a lot of families will jump in and they kind of will, once they decide they want to homeschool, their first thought is, I want to grab a hold of something. And so they'll, buy a prepackaged curriculum, or they'll talk to a friend who homeschools and say, well, what are you doing? And they'll grab a hold of that and kind of cling to it like it's a raft in the middle of the ocean, right? And so they have this, um, it's almost like an allegiance to it, but also even just a desperation for something. And even though they want simple, they know they want simple, they're afraid to let go of what they're already doing because they fear that maybe it'll overcomplicate things, or the more that they explore, they're going to get overwhelmed. And so one of the things that I love about what you focus on and kind of your whole approach is really this connection between the more informed you are, the more simplified you truly can be in your approach. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of how you came to that, because my thought is, here you are, you went through the system, you kind of saw the complicated version, then you are clearly well educated yourself. You're doing this research, you have kind of this whole academic world open to you. What was that transition like to then, when you're approaching educating your own children, recognizing why simple was the way to go and the value of keeping things simple?
Right, right. So it was a journey for me. I didn't, I wasn't born as a homeschooler this way. I actually did not intend to homeschool originally.
Interesting.
My oldest, we had decided on Catholic school. My husband and I, he's a product of the Catholic school system, and we had chosen that just because we felt like when parents are paying for school, they tend to be more engaged. So you're selecting a
Sure.
culture where everyone is valuing education to some degree, right? So
Right.
that was really our logic for going through the private school system out here in Indiana. And my first child was getting ready for kindergarten. So I was talking it up and I was, hey, we get to go visit your new school. And he flat out looked at me and said, I don't want to go to school. And I had already been teaching him how to read because he is a very precocious child and he wanted it. And so
Sure.
I was sort of feeding him everything he wanted, right? So he was reading about solar cars and things when he was 4, and or having me read out loud to him, right? So he already knew how to read and a lot of the things you would learn in kindergarten. And I kept selling him on the idea, how we do arts and crafts, you'll do lots of arts and crafts, you'll meet friends. And he said, you can keep teaching me, mommy. And so then I kept selling it. And he finally said, but mommy, you would miss me. And that was the sort of
Wow.
closing argument, right? Because he
Yeah.
clearly knew more than I did. And I looked at him, I said, you're right, I would miss you. And that was the clincher for me, is that I would miss him terribly if he was gone all day. And so we did we'll see how it goes, right? Kindergarten isn't required in our state. He already knows the things he would learn in kindergarten, right? It was safe
Sure.
to say, we'll keep him home for kindergarten and we'll see how it goes. So I was a very reluctant homeschooler, and for a few years were doing the we'll see how it goes phrase, right? We'll do 1 year and we'll see how it goes. We'll do 1 year and see how it goes. And I
Yeah.
found myself seeing him excel, academically as an individual. And we really liked this model of schooling. And suddenly, though, it hit me that the way I was doing it was not sustainable, right? So I had other young children in the home. I was being overly ambitious. I'm one of those people, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it 150%. And I have brought
Right.
that with me in the sense that I felt like the more I did, right? And we have this in our culture, and it's why I talk so much about consumerist, and we see our value in how much we get done, or in
Yeah.
how much we own, or the quality of what we own. And I started to realize that logic doesn't translate well to a happy life, a happy existence, right? And so it was no longer about like how much I was getting done in the day, right? Because busy
Right.
work is worthless. Things that he's not going to retain are essentially worthless unless they're exposing him to something that's, making him love learning or know how to learn better, right? And so I started realizing that the value was more in the impact. It was more in the experience and the impact. And so we were on vacation, and, I'm supposed to be relaxing. And instead, my spinning about how I was going to fit it all in and manage an infant and a preschooler and do all the things. And I wanted to combine multiple curricula together because I liked this part of this and I didn't want to miss out
Sure.
on that. And finally, I was like, how do the schools do it? This is so stressful. And then I realized the schools don't do this. The schools don't,
Yeah.
they don't say this is super fascinating and my kid's gonna love this. And if they have this, that'll prepare them for that. It's much more of a rote, these are your standards, right? And
Yeah.
so I realized that homeschooling is not schooling, and that it's not the ideal, right? For me as a homeschooler, it's not the ideal to try to recreate the public school, or even some, in my mind at the time, enhanced version of the public school, right? Where they're sitting at a
Right.
desk for 8 hours,
Right.
right? I knew that wasn't going to work. And I knew after a certain time period, my kids don't have the attention to even absorb anymore, right? So it's not an option to load all these things on them. And instead, I really started to look at impact. And so I just narrowed it down, and I realized that if we really focus on a few quality things, they get way more out of it than if I was trying to superficially do a whole bunch of things that were sort of like shoulds on my list. They should learn Latin word roots, or they should learn a foreign language, or they should, right? We have this whole list of homeschoolers and as parents, honestly,
Yeah.
of things we should be doing. And I realized that that's imposing someone else's value system on me and my life and my children and my parenting and my schooling. And instead, I wanted to look at more what is of value to us as parents, as a family, what's of value to these individual children, instead of all of these shoulds that the rest of the world is somehow imposing on my mindset. And
Right.
so by really breaking free of those two ideas, that there were this whole list of shoulds I should be doing, and this idea that the more we do qualifies us for, some sort of, I don't know, there's no award at the end of homeschooling, right? So why should I pile on all of these things? The goal is learning. And once I could simplify it to that really the goal is learning, the goal is helping my child reach their potential, it was able to strip back a lot more and say, okay, what do we want to focus on right now? I trust that I have years with these children, and that everything that they learn and experience will accumulate. So what is going to be the most impactful right now? And
Yeah.
I think that was really the clarifying moment for me. And I ended up a couple years later writing the book Minimalist Homeschooling, based on those ideas. Like, how do you sift through all of the options and decide what's going to be impactful right now in order to keep it simple?
And that is absolutely what's missing in most public, private, charter, all these traditional school settings.
Right.
Uh, Speaking from my own experience for a moment, so I went into teaching after being homeschooled for my entire life, really with
Okay.
this mindset of I I can't wait to bring all of the good things that I loved about homeschooling into my classroom, right? I'm going to be the teacher that gives these kids a break from all that totally drags about public school. So like I loved getting to, it was a similar experience to you of like getting to school, getting to college, getting grad school. All of it was so exciting for me. And I thought, well, learning should be enjoyable and fun for kids as well. I can't wait to go into a classroom and give them this. And it was just so depressing, year after year, to realize how little of that I was actually allowed to provide. I mean, I had minute requirements on the specific subjects that I was mandated to teach. I had curriculum requirements that I was only, allowed to use and was not to use non-adopted curriculum that was district approved. I had daily schedule requirements as far as this has to happen at this time and for this amount of time, and this has to happen at this time, and you can't switch it around, and this is what you're teaching at this point in your day, to not to mention just the sheer fact that I was completely outnumbered in terms of student to teacher ratio. I had 30 plus kids in my room and no aid. So when you explain kind of the best practice, or the best approach for student approach, I think I know that I wasn't alone. There are so many teachers who know better, who go through credentialing programs that teach us better, right? We learn this pedagogy and this approach that is all about student-led interest and um, student ability being what what leads us. And then we kind of get funneled into this system that doesn't recognize any of that. And so it's all about, well, how old are they? Well, this is what they need to learn. Well, what point in the year is it? Well, this is what they need to learn. Well, what publishing company are we, friends with? Okay, this is what they're going to. And I love how homeschooling just completely blows that apart. And so you're absolutely right that they have years and years with you, and they will learn everything that they need to learn, as well as so much more that they want to learn that will help them become the people that they need to be, far beyond the overcrowded environment that public school can be. Now, does that mean that homeschool is right for every single kid? Of course not. Does that mean every single family can do homeschool justice? Unfortunately, no. There's many reasons why, because of work requirements or scheduling issues or, other things that, will limit someone's ability. Not everyone is going to be able to make homeschool what it needs to be. But in its best form, it's amazing how homeschool really can allow you to simplify while deepening what your children get out of it. I would love to hear a little bit about, you mentioned your book, and I would love to hear a little bit about what you see as some of the bedrock principles that homeschoolers can apply. Especially, I'm thinking of the homeschool family that maybe is brand new or they jumped into this, within the last couple of years, and they're still just kind of getting their footing, or even those who are considering homeschooling but not sure. What lifeline would you toss to them? What principles would you say, hey, if you can just focus on these things, you're going to be okay for your first several months or maybe even years until you have time to digest and process and learn a little bit more and broaden your approach?
Sure, for sure. So I first want to say I absolutely 100% agree with you in the sense that I don't want to bash teachers. I know there are a lot of teachers who really want the best for their students. And I also
Sure.
agree that homeschooling isn't for everyone. I definitely consider it a luxury. It's a commitment, it's a huge responsibility. And, I think that not everybody can make the most of it. And I do think that our teachers provide an invaluable service to, our community as a whole. We
Absolutely.
would be teachers, right? So I do agree with that. But, you get back to, you really can't beat the student teacher ratio in a homeschool,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes.
I mean, already we just have that advantage and they can't compete with that right off the bat. But so the book Minimalist Homeschooling, I guess, instead of referring to the book for that particular question, I would say that when we find ourselves sort of inundated with life or with homeschool and everything just feels like too much,
Hmm.
or that it's not making the impact that we want it to make, right? Because it's very easy to feel busy but then feel like, what did I get done today? I was so
Right.
busy, but what did we actually get done? And that to me was the worst feeling, right? I am so busy all the time. I'm exhausted, but yet I don't feel like we're accomplishing anything meaningful. And
Hmm.
so the book starts with, where does your meaning lie? Right? Why are you homeschooling and what will make you feel satisfied at the end of this journey? What is your big why? How will you define your own success? Right? Because now success isn't so much getting on the honor roll, right? It's a
Right.
much bigger picture when you're homeschooling. And so I think that every homeschooler should start with, what is their definition of success? And for me, the definition of success is doing the most important things really well. So it's not doing
Hmm.
all the things, right? It's doing the
Right.
important things really well. And then we get to decide what those important things are. And I think that changes by student, right? Because not
Sure.
every student is designed to be an investigative journalist, and not every student is designed to be a NASA engineer, and not every student is designed to be a veterinarian, right? And so we get to decide what the most important things are for those kids. And so I think that's the first starting point, because otherwise it gets very overwhelming if you're trying to use the school system's definition of success. I think a lot of times
Sure.
as homeschoolers, we end up feeling dissatisfied with that. One, because we're the ones giving the grades, right? So it's like, well,
Yes.
I gave them an A. Is there really any credibility to that? I think
Right.
we doubt ourselves as homeschoolers, right? We're coming out of a system that has really set us up to doubt whether we're doing it right and to require someone else to tell us that we're performing. And
Absolutely.
so I think if we can start by defining our own levels of success, what will make us feel satisfied, that's super, super helpful. And then I will say in our home, we cut it back to reading, writing, and math. When I need a chance to reassess, when I need to regroup, when, right now we're in the middle of a move, we focus on
Yeah.
reading, writing, and math. And
Yeah.
through that, I think that you touch on a lot of things because one, that opens up free time for your kids and they can explore their own things, whatever they're interested in that free time. So I definitely support making the effort to get your kids the things that they're interested in other than maybe video games or watching TV, right? So we've
Sure.
always had a maker space in our house. If my kids want to go to the library, we go to the library, right? So this idea that opening up free time, that time can be used productively for them to learn whatever they want to learn in a very child directed manner, I think is really eye opening for me. Once I realized that giving my kids more free time actually meant that they were learning more and doing more and
Yes.
exploring more and experimenting more and making more things, it really took the pressure off of me.
Yes. It's interesting because so many, um, you know, classrooms, they'll use that as a currency, right? So a teacher will say, if you guys do really well on these assignments, you'll get 10 minutes free choice time. And,
Mm,
the kids will jump at the chance and do whatever they need to earn these precious moments. And it's always, a matter of minutes, but to earn these precious moments to direct their own learning and direct what they do. And every time I saw that happen in classrooms, I was in my own classroom for years, and then I was an administrator, and so I got to go into several other classrooms. Every time you see this implemented, not once do you see a kid sitting there without anything to do or saying, I'm bored, right? It's every time, kids collaborating on building something out of materials or reading up on something that was interesting to them that they ran out of time to study earlier, or just reading, together, or reading on their own quietly in a corner, or talking to each other. And you're absolutely right. It's giving them that freedom, and that time is what opens up the door to more learning. I love you have a video on your YouTube channel about well, I think you have a podcast episode about it as well, but it's kind of about this principle of like homeschooling like a boss and applying the 80-20 rule to simplifying homeschool. And for anyone listening who's not familiar with that, I highly recommend going and listening to that, because it applies directly to what you were just talking about, right? We have so many things that we could fill our day with, so many things that our kids could be doing, but if you really look closely, 20% of those are giving them the most meat, and the other 80% is kind of, well, yeah, it's good, or I don't even know why we do that, right? And so
right,
your family has your core subjects. Maybe for another family it could be a little different, or
right,
maybe could include or not include. But the idea is having that awareness, knowing what that is for your family. What's the 20% that you can cut back to at any given point? Or maybe start to take out parts of the other 80% and put in more of what's more meaningful, what's more impactful.
right. Absolutely. I think that I had to realize too, I think that we are not responsible for filling up our children's days. Like that's not our job,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
Our job is to help them reach their potential and to guide them to do that on their own eventually. And so, our job is to give them certain skills and certain tools and certain life lessons, but it's not to fill up their days, right? And if I think about as adults how resentful we are if we are called into a meeting at work, for example, that seems worthless, that it just wasted our time,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
We are
It could have been
super
an email,
resentful.
right?
Right, exactly, exactly. Like we are super resentful of that. And I don't think kids are any different. I think that time is their currency, right? And so
Sure.
it's gotten to the point now where even my 14-year-old, he's in 8th grade, he'll say to me, Mom, I just don't think that's a good use of my time. If he's doing a co-op class or
Mm-hmm.
something else, he'll say, I think I could just read the textbook at home. I don't think it's a good use of my time. And it's because he will
That's
also
so
then
great.
ask me, he'll say, Nationals is coming up, Mama. I want more time to build my planes or something like that. And so he definitely recognizes now that, time is a finite resource, and using time wisely is something that we can all think about setting a good example for our children for, right? And not making
Sure.
them trudge through things that they feel resentful of. I don't think that any homeschool is happy when our kids have to spend too much time doing things that they don't see the value in, even though we do.
Right.
Now, I will say that my kids absolutely have to do some things that they don't see the value in. But I think the goal is to not abuse that power, so to speak, right? So
Right.
to use it in moderation for the things that truly are important.
Well, and if I try to think back and kind of zoom out at that principle and analyze why do we feel that pressure, right? What are some of the underlying reasons why so many of us feel compelled to do those things? Um, I think a lot of it does have to do with this kind of justification or need to feel justified in our approach. And so not only for ourselves, especially those who have gone through the public school system and maybe, feel, well, it's not a valuable school approach if it doesn't look like the school that we all know. But
Mhm.
especially I think with extended family, friends, even in many cases, spouses who are very critical of homeschooling in general. And so you almost feel like you have to have this wall of defense so you can say, hey, look here, we're doing these things. So of
Mhm.
course we're accomplishing what we're supposed to accomplish. Because look at my checkbox, right? I've checked off all these things on my list.
Right.
Therefore, I must be doing something. How have you, I don't know how much you've personally come across that necessarily in your own family, but as you've worked with families, as you've helped others, what advice do you have for overcoming that? Because I think that's a real struggle for those who have chosen. And I do think that there's a lot of families who have not yet chosen to homeschool because they're afraid of that, right? That pushback from those around them.
Right. And I think that goes back to a cultural sort of pressure to somehow be accepted by other people. And at
Hmm.
the end of the day, these are my children. They've been entrusted to me, and my goal is to help them be who they're meant to be, not to impress my neighbor next door, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean, it
Amen.
really goes back to that consumerist mindset where are we making our choices based on how they will appear to others, or are we making our choices based on what's in the best interest of us, our families, our children, right? And our role in this
Yes.
world. I'm Catholic, so of course it's who does God want me to be, not
Yeah.
is my neighbor condemning what I've chosen, right? And I
Right.
think that takes a lot of it definitely takes a lot of confidence, and it's definitely hard on people, especially because we absolutely want the approval of people who are close to us, our parents and everybody else. And it comes back to that internal sense of confidence in what we're doing, and how if I sit down and I say this is success for my homeschool, that this will make me confident that I'm doing the right thing, and I'm striving towards meeting those goals, and hopefully they're not the goals of this is what will impress my mother-in-law, right? Then I
Right.
think it's a lot easier to sleep at night, right? um,
Yes.
Thankfully, because of my degree, people don't really question whether I'm qualified, right? um,
Interesting.
so
Interesting.
I haven't had to deal with that, and I have an amazing husband who always has like a quick comeback. So he
Yeah.
he
I
so
do enjoy those opportunities for our family. So good on him
yes,
for taking them as
yes.
well.
So he will get it, and I we could have a whole nother conversation with him. He's very ADHD and how always has been very ADHD, and so his school experience
Sure.
obviously also then forms how we interact with our children in a homeschool setting.
Yeah.
And so, but that makes him he has that quick personality. He's relied on his personality, and people have asked him, well, they've asked him, how is your wife qualified? And his response
Mm.
is always, oh, she went to public school. And they look at him funny, and he says, oh, you're questioning whether public school makes her qualified to teach our children third grade material, and that
Yeah,
kind of points out
it's
the
so
obvious.
great.
If our schools, yeah, if our schools are preparing us, have taught us what we all need to know in a way that we can convey that information to others, then we should all
Right.
be confident homeschooling. And if we
Yeah,
are not confident homeschooling, then clearly the solution isn't necessarily to put our kids in that same school system, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
to pay close attention to whatever we're choosing. And so yeah, I think that luckily I have that perspective every time I'm feeling doubtful. I
right.
have him pointing out the obvious to me, and also I keep coming back to, I sort of have this manifesto that we wrote about why we're homeschooling and what is of
Yeah,
value to us. And if
yeah,
I can, sort of do that sort of examination of conscience, if you will, at the end of the day, am I still striving for these goals, not what everybody else thinks of me? And then I can go to sleep easily at night, right? And I can feel
yeah.
enthusiastic about the next day.
That's a great perspective. And I think it is interesting, these preconceived notions that people have. I mean, ultimately, you'll never run out of opportunities for people to question you. And so there could be
Right.
people who would, come at you and say, "Oh, well, you're, overqualified, or you're too narrow in your qualifications." It doesn't matter really at the end of the day. It really does come back to what are your priorities, what are your values, what do you define as your goal, and then how are you going to approach that? I do love, kind of that parallel, because I think so many people over credit public school for what it accomplishes, and undervalue how much of what they learned and who they are really came from their own drive, their own determination, their own interests. Um, and the way that and again, teachers will have so much support from me. The public school system has minimal support from me. So I want to be very careful. I'm talking about
Hmm.
the system. But so much of what public school does is get in the way of this quality learning. And so, when you mention your husband, I mean, I'd love to have a conversation with him. I have very strong opinions on um, what we call ADHD, and how it's actually a gift, and most kids learn to view it as a disability, when in reality absolutely a gift. But
Hmm.
it's so interesting how so many of the things that an ADHD mind is gifted to accomplish are not possible in a public school setting, right? What's valued is stay at your
Right.
seat, stay quiet, stay on task. Don't let your mind jump to other things. Don't think deeply about anything. And by all means, keep that divergent thinking out of this room, because we only have a limited amount of time to get through these topics, and we've got to rush everyone through. Where you look at some of the amazing problems that are being solved in the world, and usually you'll find a whole team of people whose minds jump all around, and who have tons of divergent thinking, and who don't stay on one assigned topic, but rather think about the concept and then jump around for 50 different approaches of how they're going to solve it, and that's how they find the new discoveries that they find. So yeah, your points are very well taken.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. I mean, I should say he was never medicated, and he's not, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I think it's what makes him who he is, and
sure.
I think he'd be a completely different person, and and not for the better, right? So
Yeah,
for sure. And I will also say that who are teachers and principals and things, and I adore them, and I don't ever want to appear as though it's a zero sum game. Just because
sure.
homeschooling is great doesn't necessarily mean that every teacher is evil, right? So
Right.
it's the negative is not necessarily untrue, right? So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I talk about this all the time, because I'm in this unique position of, like, having been homeschooled, then worked for the better part of a decade in public schools, and then being a homeschool parent myself. It's like you can't offend me no matter what criticism you have about any of these systems, because from my perspective, it's like, yeah, how do we make it better? If we're talking about
Right.
public school, great. How do we make it better? If we're talking about homeschool, excellent. How do we make it better? It's
Right.
about the kids. It's about educating kids, and there's going to be different settings for different circumstances, and that's great. I would hate it if all we had was one option that had to work for everybody, because that's not human existence. We have to have some different options, different approaches. But where I get hung up is if we put anybody above reproach. And so it would always drive me crazy when people would say, "Oh, you're a teacher. That's so sweet," or "That's so fun." And I'd be like, "Well, how do you know I'm any good?" Or people would like, I'd be at church and people like, "Oh, I'm sure you could teach this because you're a teacher." I'm like, "Well, have you seen me in my classroom? Maybe I'm a terrible teacher." We kind of bestow these assumptions on these situations. Like, well, I don't think all teachers are anything. They're not all good. They're not all bad. They're each individually a human, and I'll judge each one individually based on their, approach and their circumstances. For those who are just learning about you from the podcast, or maybe only familiar with you on YouTube or only on Instagram, I'd love for you to share a little bit about not just where they can find you, but kind of what you're doing with kind of your different. You have your website, you have your social media. What can people expect to find, and how can they connect with you on each of those?
Sure, sure. So I do have a website. It's zaraphd.com. And that's where I try to collect links to the podcasts and any blogs and things that I've done. You
Perfect.
can also find links to social media there. And I also collect the videos from YouTube there. So that's a good landing page to sort of
Yeah,
find all the things, right? I'm
great.
on YouTube as Zara PhD. I'm on Instagram as Zara PhD. And I have a Facebook group called Minimalist Homeschooling with Zara PhD. So those are easy ways to find me. I will say that I sort of talk about homeschooling in my free time because I am busy homeschooling and running businesses.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a ministry, a hobby, if you will. I
Hmm.
like to support homeschooling. I know that it's daunting. I know firsthand that it's incredibly daunting, and I like to help make homeschooling sane again, right? So
Right.
it can get crazy. It can absolutely get crazy and overwhelming. And so I do that in my free time. So as much as I would love to say that I podcast every other week, sometimes I fall short of that. But I
Sure.
am consistently putting out content as my schedule allows, and hopefully, it's worth looking through all of the old things that I've posted, right? So all of the previous podcasts, all of the previous videos are all there waiting for whoever's new to the whole idea of minimalist homeschooling.
Yeah, I will give my upvote for that as well. Absolutely, because as I've kind of gone back and deep dived in some of them, I think what you do so well is you respond to kind of the zeitgeist concerns and questions. There are a lot of people new to homeschooling. I mean, the last couple of years, we've seen the number of homeschoolers in the country more than double. And so we have literally millions of families that are new to it. And you are really focused on answering these core questions of, kind of your mindset, your approach. You have such great advice on approaches to scheduling. I love what you suggest about kind of this like reverse scheduling approach, where when you're starting out, you can go through a week and kind of let what you teach happen, and then you're going back and filling it in at the end of the day. I'm probably butchering the description. I'm trying to do it a quick summary, but
Yeah.
your concepts and your approaches are so um, easy to grab a hold of, easy to apply, but based on these really important principles of simplicity and taking it back to what works for you.
Right.
As somebody who has extensive training and extensive experience myself in pedagogy, whether or not you studied that extensively outside of it just being important to you in your homeschooling, you are spot on. So I will absolutely
Oh,
give
well,
my upvote that maybe you don't have every week posted stuff, but what you've posted is so good and so exactly what people need to hear. I know you
thank
do
you.
have a course on your website. Do you want to give that a quick plug so people who maybe want to, jumpstart
Yeah.
their approach?
Sure, absolutely. So I have a Simple is the New Smart membership. That's also the name of my podcast, is Simple is the New Smart. And that's on Spotify and Apple and pretty much everywhere you can find a podcast. And so on the membership, I have exclusive podcasts as well as a minimalist homeschooling masterclass. And that walks people through the very beginning of deciding on their values, all the way through how that translates into choosing resources, as well as how they will schedule their days, and finally how they'll organize their space and their storage.
Mm.
So it is sort of a masterclass designed
Mhm.
for pretty much anyone at any stage. I've had veteran homeschoolers take it who have 8 children that they're homeschooling,
Yeah.
versus I've also had people who are just starting who need a roadmap of sorts. And I think it can help any homeschooler simplify and really get back to this idea that it does not have to be complicated. Right. So that we're making our own checklists now. There are certain things that we're going to put on it that are meaningful to us, and we're going to be really satisfied when we accomplish it.
And that right there is the power of simplifying. Absolutely. It gives you the focus so that you accomplish your goals. Your goals are meaningful. And what better opportunities for success could there be?
Right.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're busy always, but you're in an especially busy time right now. And so thank you for taking the time to come on the show. Thank you for choosing to homeschool your own children, even when that may not have been a easy and readily available mindset that you had, something you had to work through to get to where you are now. Thank
Mhm.
you for writing your book and creating all of your content around homeschooling, because I do think so many parents want the simplicity and want that jumping off point. But like I said earlier, they'll grab a hold of kind of whatever they can find and cling to it. And you're more about, and you and I are very aligned in this way. What are the principles? What are the concepts? What's the mindset behind it that you can then reproduce in any setting with any family and achieve that? And it will look different in practice. It's not everyone needs to, do these 8 things, but it's rather, what is your mindset? What is your approach? And then that will enable you to adopt the actions and the lessons and the curriculum and whatever else you start to fit in afterward. And so thank you for having that focus and for creating that. And thank you for having simplicity as your focus, because if there's anything that our world needs now, if there's anything that every family who chooses to homeschool will benefit from, it's that minimalist homeschooling approach and recognizing that simple really is the new smart. So thank you for all of that.
And thank you for having me, for putting on this podcast, providing information that people definitely need to hear, and for your perspective, especially as a former teacher. So
Absolutely. It's a
I
pleasure.
definitely think that's valuable to all of us.
That was Zara Fagan, PhD, mother, author, businesswoman, podcaster, and minimalist homeschooler. If you like what you heard today, please take a moment to give our podcast a positive review to grow our audience, and be sure to share it with the other parents and educators in your life. For more information on how you can become a better educator, head over to homeschooladvantage.com and check out our free resources, or consider becoming a member to unlock your advantage. Until next time, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at homeschool_advantage, Facebook and YouTube, Homeschool Advantage, and on Twitter at homeschool_ed. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.